Hello and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero and I'll be your host this evening. That's me on the Absolute Nuts livestream, properly folding a flopped set in a set versus set situation.
Fold and hold.
You guys ready for this fold?
Show the cards.
If you're looking to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em, then you've come to the right place. Backed by popular demand, this session will showcase every single hand that I am dealt, and every single hand that I play, win or lose. You're not going to see a greatest hits highlight reel where I only show my winning moments, meanwhile hiding my embarrassing plays. There are over 100 hands in this episode, so it'll be like sitting over my shoulder while getting my commentary on each and every single hand. You'll get to see not just the hands that I play, but also all of the hands that I fold, all the hands that I win, as well as all the hands that I lose. Learn how to crush low stakes live cash poker from a professional who's been in the business for over 18 years, the last 10 of which has been in Las Vegas. Tonight we'll be playing 1-3 no limit hold'em at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, where I bind for 500, which is the max. It's Friday night on October the 4th, although technically Saturday morning since we don't start until 12:41 in the morning. You gotta hope a session is gonna be good when the very first hand you're dealt is pocket aces. Pocket freaking rockets. The Jean-Claude Van Damme of live action poker. Here, the under the gun and low jack both limp. I raised to 23 in the cutoff. My typical raise for a premium hand is roughly 5 times the big blind, plus an additional X for each limper, with an X being a big blind increment. So if you ever hear someone talk about opening to 3X, they mean 3 big blinds. Everyone else folds, but the low jack makes the call. The flop comes 4, 2, king with 2 diamonds. We have an overpair and a somewhat disconnected board. My opponent checks. Sure, there's the obvious flush draw out there, but we're in a heads-up situation, not multi-way. While setting up my phone and getting ready to start the session, I saw this particular opponent only smooth call a river bet with the second nuts in a multi-way pot. This suggests he's as squeaky tight as they come. So either he's holding a king here, the flush draw, or he has some sort of middling pocket pair or suited connectors, which he doesn't plan to continue with anyways. And if he has a king or the flush draw, I wanted to make him pay a considerable amount. So I shoot out a continuation bet of 30 into the pot of 53, whereas against another opponent, I might only throw out a half pot size C-bet or even lower. This sort of targeted bet sizing that I'm using is the basis behind an exploitative playstyle and is the bread and butter behind my win rate. For my $30 continuation bet, my opponent just folds. And you may wonder why I'm spending so much time explaining such an insignificant hand, but this is an educational channel after all. If you're looking for fast-paced action, this is not the channel for you. Here I teach free lessons for low-stakes players looking to improve their win rate. A7 off in any position other than the button is just a fold. 6 deuce. In this hand I open to 10 in the middle position with A7 of clubs. The low jack, cutoff, and button all call. We go 4 ways out of position to flop a 4, king, 3, rainbow with 1 club. We flop absolute squadouche. Being first to act, I start with a check. The low jack checks as well. The cutoff throws out an incredibly timid bet of 10 into the pot of 44. The button folds. A bet this small is pretty polarizing. He could have an incredibly weak hand here. He could also have an incredibly strong hand like a set, since there's not a whole lot to be afraid of on this sort of flop. He might be baiting someone to raise. Regardless, I don't feel like making a play here with such low equity in my hand, so I just fold. The term equity refers to my odds of winning the hand against my opponent's hands. If one of my opponents were holding a king here, I only have 3 outs to hit an ace, but if someone were holding a set, I would need to go runner runner straight or runner runner flush. None of these prospects sound particularly appetizing to me when I've only invested $10 into this hand, so let's just move on. Here under the gun limps, I open to 20 in the middle position with pocket jacks. The hijack 3 bets me to 60 with the $300 stack. The action folds around to me. It's $40 more for me to call. This is a terrible price for me to set mine if I think I'm behind, considering my opponent's stack is not deep enough to warrant the call. However, I'm only 5 hands into the session, and I have no idea how this particular opponent plays. He could be doing this with ace-king, ace-queen suited, or even a smaller pocket pair like pocket 10s or 9s. I did a 1-3 vlog earlier this summer with pocket jacks, and I got 4-bet pre-flop from an opponent on the button. I decided to make the tentative call. The flop came ace-high. I checked, and my opponent jammed for the remainder of his stack. I mean, I was losing to all of my opponent's pocket pairs that had me beat pre-flop. Plus now I'm also losing to all of his ace-high holdings, so obviously I had no choice but to fold, which I did face up, only for my opponent to show pocket nines. He 4-bet pocket freaking nines and then shoved all in on an ace high flop. People in the 1-3 do all sorts of weird stuff, man. So with that harsh memory in mind, I'm not about to fold pocket jacks just to a 3-bet. So I put in the call. The flop comes 5, 7, 6 with 2 hearts and a club. 8, 9 flops the nuts, but we still maintain our overpair. Since I'm out of position, I start with a check in an attempt to garner some information about the strength of my opponent's hand. If he has ace king or ace queen, a lot of timid players will just check this flop back. Unfortunately, this is not one of those players. My opponent throws out a very strong bet of 80 into the pot of 127. This is a 2/3 pot size bet. He's not showing any signs of weakness whatsoever. But what if he's just overplaying his hand? Like the guy with pocket nines from earlier this summer. What if he only has pocket tens? Or maybe he's the type of guy that c-bets all flops regardless of whether he hits or not. I double check my hand and notice I am indeed holding the jack of hearts, so I put in the call. The turn brings in a 4 of hearts, completing the front door flush. Various straight draws get there as well, like pocket 3s or pocket 8s. Perfect! I highly doubt my opponent is holding pocket 8s, although anything is possible at these stakes. But if my opponent is actually ahead of me here with an overpair, I just gained a ton of additional outs to either chop or even win if the river brings in a 3, an 8, or a heart. Plus there's always the benefit that if my opponent is actually ahead, I could use this card as a scare card to semi-bluff and take down the pot. So I snap shove all in for the remainder of my opponent's stack, which is about $160. He doesn't immediately snap call, which is always a great sign. He sits there and he complains that the turn is the worst turn possible for his hand. He tanks for about 15 seconds and then puts in the fold. I may or may not have had the best hand there, but regardless, it was definitely the best play I could have made. 10-5, 6-7 off in the big blind facing a raise and a 3-bet, Queen 4 suited in the small blind facing a raise and a 3-bet. Here the middle position limps. I'm sitting here with ace deuce offsuit on the button, which is a pretty garbage hand, but this is the one position where I'll play it voluntarily. If the action had folded to me, I would have opened this hand to $10 against the blinds, but since there's already one limper, I just limp behind as well. The small blind completes and the big blind checks. The flop comes 9, 6 deuce rainbow. We flop bottom pair, but not a whole lot else. When the action checks to me, I have showdown value, so no need to do anything here other than check behind. The turn brings in a beautiful ace of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board, meanwhile improving us to aces up. We're still losing to ace 6 or ace 9 though, but when the action checks to us for a second time, it's time to get some value out of this hand. I put in a strong bet of $10 into the $12 pot, targeting anyone with a naked ace or the backdoor flush draw. A hand like 7-8 might come along for the open-ended straight as well. The small blind calls, but the other 2 players fold. The river brings in a jack of clubs. Everything misses. My opponent checks for a 3rd time. If he had missed his draw holding a hand like 7-8 or the backdoor diamonds, he's not paying a dime regardless of how much I bet. So instead, let's target hands like 9-jack or maybe just a naked ace. So I shoot out a very strong bet of 25 into the pot of 32. Unfortunately, my opponent makes a pretty quick fold, so we move on. 10-5, 9 deuce, 9-4, jack 6. For this hand, I changed seats to get a better camera angle for the vlog and post $3 in the cutoff. We're currently 7-handed. Under the gun limps. The low jack makes a small raise to $10. The hijack calls. I have a pretty garbage hand with ace 6 offsuit in the cutoff, but I've already invested $3. Plus it's a pretty small raise and I have position to the original raiser, so I put in a tentative call. The button, small blind, big blind, and under the gun all call as well. So we go 7-handed in a family pot to a flop of 8, 4, 6 with a heart and 2 clubs. The action checks around to me with only the button behind me left to act. I only have middle pair and no redraw, but whenever I change seats, I purposefully make it a point to wait until I can post behind the button. Call it being frugal, but if I'm going to voluntarily post money into the pot, I want to do it in good position. With only one player behind me in this hand, I think there's a good chance I could be ahead here, and if not, I can still steal this pot against someone holding just an 8 depending upon the runout. So I throw out a very strong bet of 50 into the pot of 70, targeting the flush draw as well as pair and straight draw combinations like 4-5, 6-7, or something similar. Everyone else folds, but the hijack calls with a large stack that covers me. The turn brings in a 9 of clubs. The flush completes. This is not a desirable outcome. It gets even worse when my opponent comes out betting, firing 50 into the now bloated pot of 170. Now, you may think this is a very small bet, but keep in mind this is the 1-3 after all. A lot of low stakes players don't bet appropriately. My bet on the flop very specifically targeted the various draws. The most obvious draw just completed, and now my opponent comes out firing. I think this is just a plain and clear fold without much wiggle room, so that's what I do. We lose a few players, so we're only 6-handed currently. Queen 9 of clubs facing an under the gun open of 15. This is just a fold. Don't play suited double gappers unless they're both Broadway cards like King 10 suited. 8 deuce, 8 deuce again, 4-9 suited in the small blind. Even with 2 limpers, I don't even bother defending for $2 more. Here I wake up with pocket jacks on the button, and the table is back to 9-handed again. The +1, middle position, and low jack all limp. I raise things up to 25, which utilizes my previously mentioned rule of 5 times the big blind plus an additional X for each of the 3 limpers, meaning my raise here needs to be roughly 8 times the big blind. Everyone else folds, but the low jack makes the call, which is the ideal outcome when you're holding a premium hand. A lot of recreational players want to entice action when they finally get a big pocket pair. They raise way too small because they're afraid no one will call otherwise. Let me pose this question to you. Would you rather win a small pot or lose a big one? A lot of recreational players lose just as much as they win with big pocket pairs because they don't know how to play them correctly, and oftentimes they might even actually lose more. Make sure to play big pocket pairs properly by raising suitably. So in this hand, the flop comes ace 4-7 rainbow. My opponent checks. Obviously, we don't like that ace. My personal strategy when I'm holding a big pocket pair that can't beat the top card on the flop is to check the action back for pot control. So that's what I do here. Keep in mind that I don't do this 100% of the time. I rarely do anything 100% of the time, but it's the strategy I lean towards most of the time. The turn brings in a 10 of hearts, putting 2 hearts on board. My opponent decides to lead for a 20 into the pot of 60. This is a really weak bet, especially considering the 2 hearts on board. I'm losing to the obvious ace, but I can beat that 10 and I can beat the heart draw as well, so I make the call. The river brings in a 6 of spades. 8-9 makes the nuts. My opponent leads again, but with only another timid bet of 30 into the pot of 100. Again, I can still beat the 10, and I wasn't calling on the turn with hopes and dreams of hitting a 2-outer. The flush draw has bricked, so not a whole lot has changed. I put in the call, and my opponent turns over his hand to reveal 6-8 offsuit for a missed double gut shot draw that rivered a pair. So I win this one. For educational purposes, you should never call with such a hand against a massive 8x raise, especially out of position. You shouldn't even play those sorts of hands for a $3 limp, to be honest. Foregoing all of that, on this river, my opponent actually has showdown value. There's no reason to ever bet $30 here. He should either check or make a massive bet and turn his hand into a bluff. If he had bet $100 on this river, I would have simply folded and put him on 2 pairs or better. 10-5 off. Here I have 5-7 of hearts, which is a pretty decent playable hand. The middle position opens to 20 with a stack of about 240. The low jack calls. This price is just a tad bit too high with consideration to my opponent's stack, so I just fold. Jack 8 of spades, which is yet another suited double gapper. Facing a $15 raise, this is just a fold. 4-3 off. Here under the gun opens to 15. I'm next to act in the +1 with ace jack offsuit. Normally I would just fold this hand the majority of the time for this raise amount, but occasionally I will mix in calling, which is what I decide to do here, and the big blind calls as well. So why would I fold ace jack to a 5x raise, you might ask? Well, consider this. What sorts of hands have we raised for this amount so far this session? Pocket aces and pocket jacks, right? Granted, we raised bigger with those 2 hands, but that's only because there were other limpers. If we were first to act, just like this gentleman in this hand, I would only open for 15. Now, how well does ace jack offsuit fare against pocket jacks and pocket aces? Pretty badly, right? That's why I consider it a dominated hand, and it falls into the same category as king queen. However, once in a while I mix in calling with weaker hands to throw my opponents off and make them think I play much weaker hands than I actually do. Keep in mind I've been playing at the Wynn Encore for most of the last 10 years and see a lot of the same faces every day. I need to keep my playstyle incredibly dynamic so that my opponents have a hard time guessing my range of hands. So in this hand, the flop comes 3 queen deuce all clubs. I double check my hand and confirm I am in fact holding the ace of clubs, so when both opponents check the action to me, I don't wait to improve before betting. Better to play my draw aggressively and try to take down the pot right here and now without needing to actually hit. I put in a very strong bet of 35 into the pot of 46. Both opponents fold, so I take this one down. 8 deuce. Here the low jack limps. The small blind puts in a respectable raise to 16 with a stack of about 950. I'm in the big blind with jack 9 of diamonds. I have $3 invested, I have positioned to the original raiser, and we're both pretty deep, so I put in the call, and the low jack calls as well. The flop comes 3, 4, king, with 2 clubs and a spade. We brick completely. So when the small blind puts out a c-bet of 23, I just fold. 8 deuce of diamonds in the small blind. Even with 2 limpers, this is not worth defending. Queen 8, jack 9, 7 3, king deuce, king 9, jack 10. Now, this hand is actually a playable hand in late position, but not in early position, so I just fold. King 4, ace 10 in the big blind is not so bad, but facing a raise and a 3-bet, this is just a fold. Here I have ace jack offsuit in the small blind. The middle position, low jack, and high jack all limp. I have a pretty decent hand, but garbage position. Taking this into consideration, I put in a massive raise to 35. I'm looking to either take the pot down right here and now, or isolate down to one player and make things easier for me to navigate post-flop. Is this a standard play? Absolutely not. I can just as easily keep this pot manageable by putting in a small raise to 15 or so. But you gotta remember that my playstyle is very dynamic, and there's always a small chance that my internal slot machine lands on something funky. So for my massive raise, the middle position ends up calling with a stack of about 175, and everyone else folds. He's a calling station I just saw limp call for $65 in the last hand in a 3-bet pot where I folded ace 10. That gave me the indication that this guy doesn't pay attention to implied odds whatsoever. So the flop comes 8, 7, 3 with 2 spades. We don't flop anything at all. This is a terrible board both for our range as well as our actual hand holding. The only hand I can credibly represent here is an overpair, which amongst the many other types of hands we could have raised with, like ace-jack for instance, is not all that credible. Plus, this smashes my opponent's defending range for flopping a set. So I start with a check. Thankfully, my opponent checks the action back. Considering how wet and dynamic this board is, that leads me to believe that his hand is pretty darn weak. The turn brings in a 7 of diamonds, pairing the board. I'm either ahead right now, or I can potentially get my opponent's weak hands like pocket 4s or pocket 5s to fold by the river. So I throw out a half pot size bet of 40 into the pot of 79. My opponent thinks over his options for about 20 seconds before putting in the fold. 10-5 suited, queen 4, king 8. Here under the gun limps. I raise to 12 in the low jack with jack queen of diamonds. This hand is not in my category of premium starting hands, so this raise is just a pot builder, similar to what I would do with a hand like pocket 7s for instance. The small blind, big blind, and under the gun all call, so we go four-handed in position to flop a 4 queen queen rainbow. What a gorgeous flop. We flop trip queens with a pretty good kicker. When the action checks to me, without any draws of any kind, especially considering I have position, I decide to check this one back. I won't always do this though. I will very often bet trips in a multi-way pot. The turn brings in a 6 of clubs, keeping the board deliciously rainbow. Small blind is going to just randomly toss his cards into the mug here. I guess he's had enough of this board. Big blind leads for 15 into the pot of 48, which is an unfortunately small bet. Under the gun folds. I can't let this bet go through in case my opponent had a hand like 3-5 or 5-7 for the open-ended draw. Plus, he might just have a hand like pocket 8s and simply won't believe me. So I raise the action up to a modest 40, which is still under a pot-sized bet. My opponents fold, and I take this one down. 7-9, ace-6, king 5 of diamonds under the gun. Here there are 3 limpers, so I check my option in the big blind with ace-8 offsuit. We brick the flop, there's a bet, so I just fold. King 8, jack 8. Here there are 3 limpers in front of me. Queen 9 of diamonds isn't a great hand, but I have decent position in the cutoff, so I limp along with the others. The button calls, the small blind calls, but then suddenly the big blind throws out a massive raise to 25. So time to let this one go. 3-10 of clubs, king 3, ace 3, 9-3, 9-10 under the gun, 4-9. Here I have ace 5 offsuit in the small blind. There are 3 limpers in front of me, so I complete for $2 more, and the big blind checks. The flop of king 6 jack completely misses us, so time to move on. 10-4 suited, 9-6, 9 deuce, 9-6 again. I finally get a playable hand in the form of king queen offsuit in the big blind. We're currently 7-handed. Under the gun folds. The middle position, cutoff, and small blind all limp. I put in a respectable raise to 15. The middle position folds, but the cutoff and small blind both call. We go 3 ways to a flop of 6, 3, 9, rainbow. Small blind checks. We don't flop anything at all. And on top of that, this is a terrible flop, both for our range as well as our actual hand holding. I don't believe in c-betting on boards that don't make sense for our range, especially when we have such low equity. So I just check as well, and the action checks through. The turn brings in a 4 of diamonds. We don't improve whatsoever. The action checks to the cutoff, who puts out a reasonable bet of 20 into the pot of 48. Small blind folds. I can't credibly represent anything here, so I just fold as well. Queen 4 offsuit. Here we're down to only 5-handed. The middle position and cutoff limp in front of me, so I limp as well on the button with 8-5 of hearts. Yes, I literally limped with a suited double gapper. You gotta keep in mind we're only 5-handed at the moment, and I also have the button, which is a very powerful tool, especially when you're short-handed. The small blind completes, and the big blind checks his action. So we go 5 ways in a family pot to a flop of deuce, 5, 6, rainbow. We flop middle pair on an extremely low board that's unlikely to hit too many players. So thankfully, everyone checks the action over to us. The whole reason I play garbage like 8-5 suited only on the button is for the free information that we just got. Had someone come out firing full pot in front of us, I would have just folded. In a limped pot, our opponents could have anything here, from a flopped straight, 2 pairs, a set, or even a modest overpair like pocket 7s or something similar, all of which have us drawing pretty close to dead. But since everyone else checked, we could very well have the best hand right now and should put in a bet. So I start with the positional bet of $10 into the $15 pot. The big blind and cutoff call, but the other 2 players fold. The turn brings in a beautiful 8 of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board and improving us to 2 pairs. 4-7, which would have flopped an open ender, does improve to a straight, and 7-9 also makes the nuts. Both of these sorts of hands would have called a $10 flop bet. So even though our hand strength just improved, we need to proceed with caution. Never play poker with blinders on while only focused on your own hand. Always be aware of what sorts of hands your opponents could be holding based on the action. This is known as being cognizant of your opponent's range and being able to put them on certain types of hands. When the action checks to us for a second time, I continue the aggression with a bet of 25 into the pot of 45. I want to get value out of weaker hands and draws, meanwhile being cautious of check raises. Again, our opponents only just call. Since the turn introduced a second diamond on board, a hand like 4-7 or 7-9 will often, but not always, check raise here. Since our opponents only just called, we can assume we're most likely good here most of the time. The river brings in a deuce of hearts, pairing bottom pair. The only combinations of a deuce our opponents could be holding here are deuce 3 and deuce 4, but one of them was admittedly the big blind. Both of these hand combinations would have flopped a pair and a gut shot draw. That aside, a deuce here is a pretty good river card, all things considered. Our opponents check for a third time. I want to target hands like a naked 6, 7-8, which would have flopped an open ender with 2 overs, and the very rare, cautiously played pocket 7s. So I shoot out a bet of 60 into the pot of 110. If we face aggression here in the form of a check raise, this will unfortunately have to be a fold on our part. Very rarely will low stakes players check raise on this sort of runout as a bluff. It'll be weighed much more heavily towards a slow played straight, a slow played set, or even river trip deuces. Thankfully, this does not happen. Both opponents just fold and we take this pot down. Now, you may be wondering why I spent so much time explaining such a seemingly insignificant hand. Well, I wanted to explain my mental process for each step of this hand, starting from preflop and working all the way through to the river. If asked why you bet a certain amount, or decided to play a certain hand in a certain position, you should always have a clear answer. Don't just play random hands because you're bored, or bet random amounts that you pull out of a hat. You should also always be thinking about the sorts of hands your opponents could be holding for particular bet sizes. Practice this sort of mental evaluation, and you'll find yourself becoming a much more thoughtful poker player. At this point, we're currently up $323 after 2 hours and 20 minutes of playtime, winning steadily, but without a whole lot happening so far. Our old short-handed table has broken, so we're moved to a new full table with a completely different table dynamic. Let's see if we can get into any exciting hands before the end of this vlog. That's not going to happen with 8-3 offsuit though. Queen 3, Jack 7, Jack 10, no. Jack 10 offsuit may look tempting to a lot of my beginning players, but I don't play these sorts of hands in anything other than super late position. King 5, 10-4, King 4, 6 deuce, King 7, 7-9, 8-9, King 8. Oh look, it's the Robbie, aka Jack 4 offsuit. But unfortunately, I don't have the advantage of being able to see my opponent's hands, so this is just a fold. Jack 5. After 25 minutes of being on this new table, I finally get a playable hand in the form of Ace 10 offsuit and open to 10 under the gun. Only the big blind defends with a similar stack of about 800. My assessment of this player so far from watching is that she's very capable and very aggressive. You should always pay attention to other players on the table even in hands you're not involved in so that you can have an assessment of the players for when the time comes. So the flop comes 6 deuce 3 with a club and 2 spades. We don't flop anything whatsoever except 2 random overcards. However, when big blind checks, I think this flop is so abysmally small that there's a very good chance it could have missed our opponent as well. So I start with a stale c-bet of another $10, which is a half pot size bet. Undaunted, our opponent makes the call. The turn brings in an 8 of hearts. This brings in a much welcome overcard to the board. We do not in fact improve, but when bluffing with air, overcards are very welcome in case our opponent were calling with weak one pair combinations. So when our opponent checks for a second time, I decide to smash for a full pot size bet of 40 into the pot of 41. I'm representing hands such as overpairs, or a set here, and very occasionally a flop straight, since I do admittedly open raise with suited connectors like 4-5 suited. Again, our opponent makes the call. She did not check raise, so her hand can't be all that strong. At this point, I'm putting her on either a draw of some sort with a hand like Ace 4 or Ace 5, a flush draw, or potentially a pair and straight draw with a hand like 5-6 suited or something similar. Nothing overly powerful. I plan to unload a 3-barrel bluff on most rivers that aren't small cards. If the river card pairs, or it's another small card, we can just check the action back since we do admittedly have showdown value with our ace high versus a missed flush draw. So the river comes, and it's definitely a card we plan to take advantage of in the form of a king of clubs. A lot of players blast ace king on all sorts of runouts, whether they actually hit or not. So this king should be a pretty good card for our range, even if it doesn't hit our actual hand holding. I mean, we are admittedly holding ace 10 right now, so it's not too big of a stretch to imagine we're actually holding ace king or king queen. Our opponent puts in a kink to our plans when she suddenly comes out firing, and for a very strong bet of 100 into the pot of 121. I'm confused. This king shouldn't have improved her hand all that much, if at all. At best, she could be holding a missed flush draw that includes a king. In the worst case scenario, if she's holding king 6 of spades, which is a complete brick wall that's never folding to any raise amount, there's no way we're going to get a bluff through against such a hand. Our opponent seems like a very capable player though, so I think if she were holding a hand like 5-6 or something similar, she could use this king as a scare card to get us to fold hands like pocket tens or something along those lines. Keep in mind we have never played with this player before, so she has no idea what we're capable of. In the last dozen or so hands since we've been on this table, we've seen her open raise on several different occasions, and taking into account her stack size, this is very atypical 1-3 behavior. This is how I analyze and typecast opponents, by the way. It's usually based on aggression levels and stack size. recreational players almost never top off. Recreational players like to limp into pots. So taking all of this into consideration, I am almost assuredly up against a thinking opponent. So aside from King 6 of spades, which is a complete brick wall, I think the maximum hand our opponent could have here is a king high flush draw that hit the king on the river. I would never attempt a bluff here against a normal 1-3 player because 1-3 players are never folding after missing a flush draw only to bink top pair. However, I think that up against a thinking opponent, she would recognize that if I raise here, her hand shrivels up to a bluff catcher at best. I'll either have complete air, or my value hands will all completely decimate a naked king. So I decide to get frisky and put in a respectable raise to 350. I'm attempting to represent the occasional set, a flop straight, or maybe even a hand like pocket aces. Since we're deep enough, I could even sometimes have illogical hands here like the occasional suited 2 pairs. I do occasionally raise with suited king combinations lower than king 10 once I start getting deep. Unfortunately, after about 25 seconds of tanking, our opponent does eventually put in the call. We proudly table our ace high, and our opponent turns over king 4 of spades for one of the very likely hands we put her on. Wah, wah, wah. And just like that, all of our profit for the session goes up in smoke in a single aggressively played hand. After winning almost every single hand this session so far, I put us in the negatives for nearly $100. And now you may be thinking, well damn, maybe this aggressive playstyle doesn't work after all. And you may be right. That's what's so exciting about these vlogs, where you get to see every single hand, right? I bet these vlogger fools usually hide these embarrassing plays in their normal vlogs so their audience doesn't get to see these sorts of hands and wreck them completely in the comments. What sort of idiot wins for nearly 3 hours only to burn it all in a single hand instead of locking up those juicy profits? Let's continue watching this Aero guy make an even bigger fool of himself. Here we're forced to play 10 deuce in the big blind. The flop misses us completely, so I just fold to a bet. The very next hand, the middle position and low jack limp, so I defend the small blind for $2 more with 6-8 offsuit, and the big blind checks. This isn't a premium hand or anything, so an argument could be made to simply just fold instead of calling the extra $2. Anyways, the flop comes 7, 7, ace, rainbow. We don't flop anything whatsoever. Thankfully, the action checks around. The turn brings in a 5 of hearts, improving us to an open-ended draw. I lead for $10 into the $12 pot, hoping to steal the pot right here and now without needing to improve. I'm using a larger than normal sizing, hoping to get folks to fold anything other than that ace. And obviously, we're most likely going to get raised at this point by anyone holding a 7. But then again, this is 1-3. Who am I kidding? People here will likely call me down with just that 5. And surely enough, the low jack ends up calling, but the other 2 players fold. The river brings in a 3 of diamonds. 4-6 completes a straight. I'm out of position, and I suspect my opponent is most likely holding an ace here, so I don't think I can get him to fold for any reasonable amount. I also don't plan to steal a pot when I only have $13 invested, so I check. Our opponent fires out an incredibly insulting bet of $10 into the $32 pot. I think he's targeting that 5, meanwhile holding an ace. Again, I don't have anything invested, so I just let this one go. Here, the cutoff opens for 10. It's our aggressive nemesis who properly called our unsuccessful bluff earlier with her king 4 of spades, looking down at our first premium hand in a long while in the form of pocket 10s on the button. I 3-bet the action up to $40. We have a great starting hand, and we also have position, but a hand like pocket 10s will likely see an overcard on the flop nearly 70% of the time, so we have to charge accordingly. People already struggle with playing pocket jacks due to the scenarios in which overcards hit the board, or they think they're behind versus an even larger pocket pair. Now imagine the difficulty with playing pocket 9s or pocket 10s. The trick to successfully playing these sorts of hands lies with proper aggression depending upon your position, and also knowing your opponents. Since I know that my opponent raises quite often pre-flop, I can safely assume that a hand like pocket 10s will have her crushed a very large portion of the time. But I still need to charge accordingly to properly assign her a likely range of hands. I can't choose an amount here like 25 or something similar, because she will likely continue with her entire range. Keep in mind that poker is a game of imperfect information. You need to gather information with all of your bet sizes. Against my substantial raise, everyone just folds and we take this one down. But remember, it's always better to win a small pot than to lose a large one. Never get upset about people folding to a properly sized bet. The very next hand, we've moved to get a better camera angle for the vlog. Our old nemesis opens for 10 again in the hijack. See what I mean? She open raises very often, and this is why I pinpointed her early on as a competent, aggressive player before I even played a single hand against her. Looking down at ace-9 of diamonds, this is a very fitting price to play with this sort of hand, so I make the call in the cutoff. The button calls, the small blind folds, and the big blind tags along as well. We go four-handed to a beautiful flop of queen 8-7 all diamonds. We flop the absolute freaking nuts in the form of an ace-high flush. Unfortunately, the action checks around to us. There's not a whole lot to be afraid of on this sort of flop. There's still a player behind us who might stab at this pot, and if nothing else, it's okay to give one free card. So I decide on a check. I won't always check this sort of flop though, even with the nuts. Depending upon my position, I might lead with an incredibly small bet here to like a quarter pot or so. Sadly, the button checks behind, so we go to a turn, which brings in a 4 of diamonds, putting 4 diamonds on board. This is not ideal. 5-6 of diamonds now has trumped us for the nuts, and a 4th diamond also dramatically reduces the sorts of hands that can pay us a hefty price on this sort of board. Thankfully, after the big blind checks, the hijack leads with a paltry bet of $10. If she's holding a diamond here, she's drawing completely dead, unless she somehow has a straight flush draw of some sort, and I want to potentially keep in the other players, so I only just smooth call, and after the button folds, the big blind tags along as well. The river pairs the board with another 4 of hearts. Again, this is not ideal. We have been demoted significantly from what used to be the nuts. Big blind checks for a 3rd time. The hijack ramps up her aggression with a bet of 40 into the pot of 71. We're hoping maybe she has a king of diamonds here, and figures no one's holding that ace due to how the action has gone so far. So I put in a raise to an even $100, hoping I don't get raised by the big blind. Thankfully, he folds. Interestingly enough, it's the hijack who puts in a raise, but only to $250. Okay, so the reason I said I was worried about the big blind raising is because he's the person who most likely can have boated up by the river. He could have checked a set of 7s or 8s on the flop, or possibly got roped into playing some sort of weird silly hand like 7-4 suited or some such, and went runner to a full house. The hijack though? No chance. Completely illogical for her to lead on the turn with some sort of set or 2 pair combination on a 4 diamond board. Only a complete beginner would do something like that. I make a very easy call, and she turns over ace queen of spades for top pair turned into a bluff, and I get to enjoy the sweet, sweet taste of revenge. I hope there's more where that came from. It's too late for the Jackson 5 to make a comeback, so this is just a fold. No dogs allowed in the casino, so K9 is a fold. Queen 7. Okay, here I open to 10 under the gun with King 7 of clubs. Now, I don't recommend my audience mimic this sort of play with such a disconnected hand. But remember how I got caught bluffing earlier on that 6-high board when I said that I sometimes open with weird combinations of a suited king? Well, I wasn't lying. I'm pretty deep, so this is an advanced move that pros very occasionally do to disguise the strength of their opening range. This is not the sort of hand I would even bother limping 95% of the time. But once in a while, I will raise with disconnected suited hands to throw my opponents off and make them think I play with much weaker hands than I actually do. So for my $10 raise, the middle position, cutoff, button, and small blind all call, but then the big blind puts in a very annoying raise to $30. This tiny raise accomplishes nothing other than to further bloat up the already bloated pot, since none of us are likely to fold for 20 more. I don't recommend making this sort of tiny 3-bet with a single hand in your arsenal, even if you have pocket aces, or rather, especially if you have pocket aces. You really don't want to take your hand against 5 other players. This will greatly increase your odds of getting cracked. In vlog number 50, when a 1-3 player did this, I incorrectly assessed this sort of raise as a weak hand and 4-bet him pretty light with ace-jack, only to have him 5-bet his entire stack of $650 into my face. 1-3 players do all sorts of weird things, so I don't want to make the mistake of assuming this is a weak hand again, and I just put in the call. And of course, as predicted, everyone else calls as well. So we go 6-handed in a very bloated pot to a flop of 9, 5, 5 with 2 hearts and a diamond. After small blind checks, big blind throws out a very strong c-bet of 100 into the $180 pot. Obviously, we have complete air, so we have no choice but to fold. But this ends up being a pretty interesting hand, so I'll tell you what happens after I end up making the fold. The middle position ends up calling the $100 bet, and everyone else folds. Long story short, the big blind ends up unloading the clip with another $175 bet on the turn and a $200 bet on the river, and the middle position calls all 3 streets with 5 deuce of clubs after flopping trip 5s, only to have the big blind table 7 deuce off suit. 7 freaking deuce off suit. He had a natural 9. Oh wait, that's Baccarat. I guess bro has been watching way too many high stakes live stream games.
And
I picked a good hand to sit out.
what?
Oh boy.
What just happened? Did Brad just ship it?
Oh boy.
And a snap call from Easy.
But even if the big blind really did have a real hand here, like a monstrous pocket pair, he would have gotten cracked for over $500 anyways. Now do you see why I said such a raise was nonsensical? After my small open for $10 and all those callers, a real hand here should have 3-bet closer to like 75. His position was terrible, and he certainly doesn't want more than like 1 caller, or 2 at the very most. Otherwise, you get all sorts of dingleberries hanging around your hand that you can't account for, like 5 deuce of clubs for crying out loud. The very next hand, 4 people limp, so we're forced to play our 10-4 of diamonds in the big blind and check our option. The flop misses us completely, so we just fold to a bet. 10-6. Okay, here I open to 10 on the button with queen 9 of clubs against the blinds. This is a very reasonable hand to open with because the blinds are often handicapped into playing weak hands out of position. I will open raise with all sorts of gobbledygook against the blinds. So for my $10 raise, the small blind folds, but the big blind defends. The flop comes 3, 3, 4 with a club and 2 diamonds. On a low paired board, I plan to c-bet small with my entire range. When I say entire range, I mean the whole spectrum of my raising hands, regardless of what I'm actually holding, whether it's 2 random overcards like I'm currently carrying, or an actual hand like an overpair. Small paired boards like this are very profitable to c-bet small on because it's extremely unlikely for our opponent to connect with. Unfortunately, my opponent takes that option away from us when he leads with a bet of $10, since we don't actually have anything except just random overcards and a backdoor flush draw. And taking into account how sticky 1-3 players are, I have no choice here but to fold. I don't particularly enjoy trying to bluff off a 1-3 player with a low equity hand when we could potentially be drawing pretty close to dead here if he were holding a 3. 7 deuce of hearts, but since we're not playing Baccarat, this is just a fold. 8-3. 10-6. Okay, so now we look down at Jack 8 of hearts under the gun. This seems like a pretty reasonable hand. It's certainly more connected than the King 7 of clubs with which I raised earlier. But like I said, I only very occasionally pull stunts like that. Doing it too often is just a losing play. So since I'm under the gun in bad position, Jack 8 of hearts is just a fold. So here I have Ace 7 offsuit in the big blind. The hijack raises to 10. The small blind calls. An unsuited ace lower than Ace 10 is not worth defending even though I already have $3 invested. So I just fold. Alright, get ready boys and girls, because this one's about to get a little bit spicy. Here the hijack opens for 10. The cutoff 3-bets to 30 with a stack of about 950. She's our nemesis from before, and the scoreboard is currently 1-1. The button cold calls. I'm sitting here with Jack Queen of diamonds in the small blind. I don't like my position whatsoever, but I know this hand is about to go multi-way, and we're currently deep enough, so I put in the call, and the hijack ends up calling as well, of course. We go 4 ways out of position to flop of 10, deuce, 4, rainbow with 1 diamond. We don't flop anything whatsoever except a couple of backdoor draws and 2 random overcards. So obviously I start with a check, and the action checks around to the cutoff, who throws out an incredibly weak c-bet of 45 into the pot of 123. Now, if this were 2-5, that would be a perfectly reasonable bet. It's a third pot bet into a dry board. There are very few draws out there. However, for a 1-3 table, that's a very non-standard bet. Most 1-3 players will bet closer to full pot here with the real hand, or at the very least, no less than half pot. So when the button folds, I decide to float here with devious intentions. I definitely do not suggest my audience mimic this play, especially out of position. Even though this is an educational vlog, keep in mind that I still employ some very advanced techniques that I don't suggest you mimic. In other words, the destructive nature of what you are about to witness is being performed by a trained professional. Do not try this at home, folks. So I put in the call, and the hijack gets out of the way, which is perfect. When attempting an advanced bluff, you never want multiple people in the hand anyways. So the turn brings in an 8 of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board. Our hand has improved to include a gut shot straight, along with a backdoor flush draw. And of course, we still have our random 2 over cards. This turn is about as dreamy of a card as we could have hoped for, without actually hitting anything. I could lead here, but it would be disastrous if we get raised, considering how large the pot is. If I check and our opponent checks back, we would get the green light to blast off on most rivers, assuming we don't actually hit. So I check for a second time, and I'm pretty surprised when our opponent fires out a second bullet for another $100. I actually thought she didn't have anything considering the size of her flop bet. Obviously, we're not going anywhere. I mean, we just got upgraded to a pretty massive combo draw, so I put in the call. The river pairs the board with another 10 of spades. Wah, wah, wah. We brick everything, and we're sitting here left with queen high. Queen freaking high. But you know what else we have? Guts and gusto, baby. I shove all in with an overbet of just over $500 into the pot of 413. If our opponent really does have an overpair here, she's not gonna like that 10 whatsoever. The flop was completely dry. There weren't any obvious draws of any kind other than a gut shot wheel draw. Plus, I cold called a $30 3-bet out of position. So what sorts of hands am I representing? When attempting a large bluff, you're trying to sell a story, and your story had better make sense. Otherwise, you're just going to blast off a ton of money trying to make grown adults believe that the Tooth Fairy exists. Well, to cold call a $30 3-bet out of position, my most likely range of hands include a lot of pocket pairs and suited connectors, kind of like the ones we're currently holding. Instead of Jack Queen suited, I could just as easily have 9-10 suited here, or Ace 10 suited, or even pocket deuces or pocket fours. I would have played most of those hands in a similar fashion, except I would have led with a much smaller bet on the river with any combination of a 10, and I would have check-raised the turn with a small set. But our opponent doesn't need to know all that. All she needs to know is that she's facing a $500 shove, and she has to hate this 10 on the river. Will I sometimes face a brick wall here when attempting such a bluff, when it's actually our opponent who's sitting there with some combination of a 10? Yeah, sure, but how many 1-3 players do you know that 3-bet while holding a 10 in their hand unless it's pocket 10s? So our opponent goes into the tank. Eventually, after a full minute, she agrees with our logic and lets her hand go. I don't show my hand though because I don't want the table to know what I'm capable of, and I generally also don't give out free information. Huzzah! 2-1, baby. Aero wins. 7-6 off on the button, so I fold to a $15 raise. My nemesis stands up to leave, and the table breaks shortly after. I'm currently up $383 after playing 3.5 hours into the session, which is slightly higher than when I first sat down on this table. I really want to get you guys at least 100 hands worth of action though, so I sit around waiting for a seat since it's currently past 4 in the morning and there aren't as many open seats available. 20 minutes later, we finally get a seat, only to look down at deuce 4 offsuit, so this is just a fold. 3-2, king 3, 10-4, 9-10 offsuit in the big blind. There's a raise, so I don't bother defending. Here, there's a live 6. There are 3 limpers in front of me when I look down at 9-8 offsuit in the small blind. Had no one limped at all, I would have just folded, but the implied odds are there in case we flop something miraculous. So I make a very loose call. The big blind calls as well, and the straddle checks. The flop comes ace, king 7, rainbow. This is about as far off from our hand as it possibly gets. Thankfully, the action checks around. The turn brings in a 9 of spades, putting 2 spades on board, meanwhile improving our hand to 3rd pair. Obviously, I don't have anything worth betting, so I check again. This time, the action checks around to the button, who now decides to bet 15 into the pot of 36. Okay, let's evaluate. This is a less than half pot size bet into a pretty darn wet board with 6 players in the hand. Plus, everyone checked on the flop. If you had a strong hand here in this sort of dynamic, how much would you bet? I'm hoping it's closer to full pot or even a slight overbet. Plus, what sort of strong hand could he possibly wake up with here after checking the flop? You're looking at 7-9, King 9, or Ace 9, and since we block a 9, those three hands are extremely unlikely, especially taking into account the weak bet. So the most likely hand range our opponent can have here is a weak 1 pair type of holding at best, or a draw. Calling this sort of board with third pair would be a mistake, so that's not even an option for us. Instead, I put in the good old-fashioned Aero check raise to 65.
Turn raises are so underbluffed in low stakes, so I'm honestly hating this spot. Like I said earlier, turn raises are super underbluffed at the low stakes, especially when a player who I haven't seen bluff all day tries to pull it off.
Our ploy works, and everyone just folds, and we snatch away another $50 to add to the family Christmas fun. Alright, time for more shenanigans. Just in the few hands that have been sitting on this table, I've spotted a few extremely aggressive players that have made massive bluffs and suspicious plays. I want them to think I'm part of the crowd. So here, after 5 people limp, which is pretty much the entire table, I put in an incredibly non-standard raise to 30 on the button with ace-jack offsuit. Everyone else folds, but the hijack calls, whom I've identified as the most action player on the table. The flop comes 9, 2, 7 with 2 spades and a diamond. We don't flop anything whatsoever except 2 random overcards. I don't typically see bet on 9 high boards with complete air. But since my raise pre-flop was so big, I think I can credibly represent an overpair here. So I throw out a very strong c-bet of 50 into the pot of 77. Our opponent calls almost instantly. The turn brings in a 3 of clubs. Our hand does not in fact improve, but we weren't really expecting it to. Okay, so what information do we have about our opponent's hand at this point? She limped $3, but then still called a 10x raise. These sorts of hands are usually, but not always, weighted towards suited connectors and small pocket pairs. Alright, and what information do we gain on the flop? She pretty much snap called my bet. So that means she didn't flop a set. That's almost always a draw. We're currently ahead of a draw. Plus we can continue the story that we actually do have an overpair here in case we need to empty the clip on the river. So I fire out a second bullet for 150 into the pot of 177 with nothing but ace high and aggression. Our opponent tanks for about 15 seconds before putting in the fold, saying that she folded a flush draw. So we get this one through. Kind of. Sort of. I mean, is it really a bluff if we currently have the best hand? The very next hand, there's a live 6. The middle position and low jack limp. I call in the cutoff with 8-10 of spades, which is a perfectly reasonable play for a suited 1-gapper. The button calls, the small blind and big blind call, and the straddle checks. We go 6 ways to flop a 3, 5, 10 rainbow with 1 spade. We flop top pair with the backdoor flush draw. Small blind checks, but the big blind leads with a pot size bet of 30 into the pot of 36, with a stack of about 250. The under the gun straddle calls. The middle position and low jack fold, so now the action is to me. I almost consider folding right here and now. We don't have a very strong kicker, but we do have a backdoor flush draw. Against a pot size bet and a call though, I'm concerned we're most likely not very good right now. However, I'm not about to fold to a single bet after I play this sort of hand, so I make a tentative call and the button and small blind fold. The turn brings in a 10 of clubs, putting 2 clubs on board. We improve to trip 10s, but if someone had a bigger 10 on the flop, this 10 on the turn doesn't really change anything other than to give us some chop outs. We do, however, counterfeit 3-5. Interestingly enough, the big blind decides to check now, and it's the under the gun straddle who decides to lead out with a bet of 55 into the pot of 126. Our kicker is about as low as it'll ever be for any combination containing a 10. A lot of amateur players will make the mistake here of thinking their hand strength has improved, when in actuality it really hasn't against a flop set or bigger 10, so I exercise a bit of caution and only just call. Suddenly, the big blind springs to life with a check raise to 110. The under the gun player surprisingly folds, and the action swings back around to us. What is he trying to represent here? A full house? I mean, he was admittedly the big blind, so that is very possible. But he might also be overplaying a weaker 10, since I chose to come into this hand, but he didn't really have a choice. Plus, this is only the turn, so we still have quite a few outs to improve, even if our opponent is already boated. And I can't exactly fold with trip 10s to a min raise, so I make the call. The river brings in a deuce of diamonds. 4-6 completes a straight. Our opponent only has 110 bucks behind, but the pot is already over 400 bucks. So if he shoves here, I'm forced to make a crying call. I think he realizes that though, so he just checks. No point betting against some kind of weird misdraw, so I just check the action back. And our opponent tables 3-5 of diamonds for a flop 2 pair that did in fact get counterfeited on the turn. Very peculiar raise on the turn there. I'm not sure what that was supposed to accomplish other than gifting my children more holiday presents, but I'll take it. Not gonna complain about a free 110 bucks for my opponent's dead draw. I've seen this play before while playing in Southern California. I turn top trips in a hand only to face a check raise from my opponent with a counterfeited 2 pair, exactly like what just happened here. I've since deemed this play it's kind of like rest and relaxation, but the opposite. You flop a monstrous hand, but you're so pissed off at the run out that you can't help but raise out of sheer spite. 5 deuce. Jack queen. Again, this is a hand that most players would play, but I fold these sorts of hands in the low jack. Jack 8. Alright, so after I've counted about 100 hands or so, I rack up my chips and head to the cage. In for 600, since I had to top off 100 bucks after that unfortunate failed ace-10 bluff, and out for 1363, for a delectable profit of $763 after 4 hours and 18 minutes of playtime. Okay, well I actually played just under 4 hours, since I had to sit around waiting for a new table for 20 minutes. But I was still at the casino for this time frame, I suppose. I hope you guys enjoyed this vlog featuring every single hand played for 105 hands worth of action. I'll try to include more of these sorts of vlogs from now on. If you like what you saw today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to learn more tips and tricks on how to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em. It doesn't take you any effort at all, but it helps the channel more than you know. Follow me on Instagram to find out about my $500 monthly cash drawings. There's only a few vlogs left before I do my end of the year $5,000 cash drawing as well. Check out my Patreon to see more of the coaching series where I also provide early access to my vlogs, or to simply find out more information about my coaching rates. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.